How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're going over the Bloomburrow previews from days 2 and 3. I had to take a little bit of a break last night, but I'm back with some stuff. Got about 20 cards I wanted to talk about. Haven't read some of them, but I want to see what they are because they look interesting. So the first card, I have read this one, and this card is really, really good. This is Innkeeper's Talent for 1 and a green. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You pay an extra green to get level 2. Permanents you control with counters on them have ward 1 and 3 and a green for level 3. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or a player, put twice that many of those counters on that permanent or player instead. So this is great for all sorts of decks. Super Friends, Planeswalkers, +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters, experience counters decks, like anything that just involves counters. This card is going to be absolutely freaking bonkers. And it's just kind of crazy how good this card is, and it is going to probably demand quite a bit of a price tag to get it. This, I can imagine this is probably going to be close to a $10 card shortly after release because it's just that good. Next up is a card that when I first read it, I was like, this is actually kind of interesting, and it completely puts the kibosh on any kind of life gain decks or anybody who depends on fog effects. It's Sunspine Lynx for 2 red. It's a 5/4 elemental cat. Players can't gain life. Damage cannot be prevented. When it enters, deals damage equal to each player to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. There's a lot going on in a compact package here. Life gain players driving you nuts, you can shut them down. Anybody who's like a turbo fog player, this shuts them down. And anybody who's greedy with their mana bases, like a 5-color player, or people who are just trying to get the quote-unquote perfect mana base, this is going to punish them by tacking on a version of Price of Progress to slam them in the teeth. Now, you do get hit as well, but the nice part here too is if I was to shell this up with white, you could flicker this and burn your opponents. And of course, since we're in red, you can play things that add extra damage or do some kind of damage doubling or anything like that. These things are really good and make this a very abusable card. Another card that's actually very abusable with those damage increasers and doublers is Iridescent Vine Lasher for a black. You get a 1/2 Lizard Assassin with Offspring 2 and landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So if you have any kind of thing that says like put 2 extra damage on stuff like that Artist's Talent that we just talked about a couple days ago, or a damage doubler or tripler or something like that, like City on Fire, you can do a ton of damage. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that you have the ability for 3 mana to make an Offspring 1/1 version of this on the board. So you're going to get 1 damage from each one of them, and then that is increased by any of the damage increasers or damage double or triplers as well. So this has a lot of abuse potential. And with in a shell that has maybe like a Jund shell where you have red, green, and black together, and you get things that put lots of lands into play at the same time, this thing could burn somebody out really quick. Then we have a card that I think might actually see some play in standard if there's some kind of Valiant type deck or a Mouse Typal type deck with Heartfire Hero. For a red, you get a 1/1 Mouse Soldier with Valiant. It says whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability the first time each turn, you put a counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to each opponent to its power. So this is a way to get a bunch of counters on this thing pretty quick with, like, I would say probably a red-white shell of some sort, which is appropriate since mice are in the red-white color scheme in Bloomburrow. And then you have the ability to, you know, swing this in, and it doesn't matter if it dies. Eventually, it's going to burn them out if they try to gang block this thing up to get rid of it as it grows. And you can just play combat tricks and stuff like that to make it even bigger and smash it through. So it kind of gives a new variant on the red-white Boros deck. Rather than going with the Convoke route, you could go with the creature types Matter and Mice, or you could do some other weird stuff. And then it also deals with counters, and we just talked about that one that doubles up counters on things. So this could pair up in like a Gruul type deck as well. Then we have a card that actually goes ahead and it synergizes really well with the Squirrel Precon and the squirrels that come in the main set. It's Bone Cache Overseer for a black. You get a 1/1 Squirrel Warlock. Tap and pay a life. draw a card. Activate if only 3 or more cards left your graveyard this turn, or if you've sacrificed a food this turn, or the forage ability that the squirrels seem to have in this set. But they didn't put forage on there because you could just sacrifice a food on its own and then be able to pay the life and draw the card, which is still a pretty good rate, because if you paid 2 to sacrifice the food, gain 3, you actually just gain 2 and you get your card as well. So there's some flexibility with them not tying it to that forage ability, but either way, this is a really good card to pair with Camellia. Next up is Coruscation Mage. For 1 and a red, you get a 2/2 Otter Wizard with Offspring 2 that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you've paid 4 mana, you go ahead and you get 2 of these, so every non-creature does 2. So it's kind of like you build your own Gutter Snipe. But in the case of this, you get a token copy, which those can be cloned off of token copiers and things like that. This also has the benefit of being an otter, going with the otter typal stuff that's coming in the set. There's just all kinds of stuff that you can do with this, and I really like it. And I also like, since it makes 2 separate instances of 1 damage, this becomes a really good card to put something with like O'Hare Ashenil, where he increases the damage of all your non-combat sources by however much his power is. So with this being 1 instead of 2 like the Gutter Snipe, you're actually getting more mileage out of this, increasing the amount of damage that it deals when you do it. And it's really good compared to the Gutter Snipe, because Gutter Snipe requires instants and sorceries, whereas Coruscation Mage is any non-creature. So all your artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, instants and sorceries, all those things, battles, all that stuff will cause this to trigger. Our next card I just read all the way through to get a feel for it, and this actually is a variation on Grafted Skullcap, and I really like it. It's Byway Barterer. For 2 and a red, it's a menace 3/3, which is good rate on it in of itself. That says when you expend 4, you may discard your hand, and if you do, draw 4 or 2 cards. So you expend 4 by spending the 4 mana, and this is actually on a really good curve because it's on the 3-drop slot. So I could see this actually seeing play in Standard and maybe even like Pioneer or something. I think it might be a little too slow for Modern unless there's like a really good burn deck there. But if you're able to, bomb somebody with a bunch of burn spells and cheap threats early and then slam this down on turn 3, on the very next turn, your hand is probably almost empty anyways. So you're going to actually be able to just go ahead and expend 2 or 4 here by dropping a spell, 1 big spell, or 2, like maybe 2 drops or whatever. And then you're going to go ahead and get the cards off of this and refill your hand. So this is actually a really good card. And I think this is sneakily will probably put in the red deck wins probably at least 2 copies of this thing in Standard. And any kind of red deck that you're running in Commander, I think is going to want to have a copy of this as well. Then we have a card that I think is a really good enabler for a reanimation strategy. It's Stargaze. For X black. Look at the twice X cards from the top of your library. Put X cards from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and then you lose X life. Most of the time when you get these look at cards kind of things, they make you put them on the bottom of the library. This one actually has you put them into the graveyard. So you're going to look at twice X. So say you paid 5 into the X, 7 mana. And you look at 10 cards, you put 5 in your hand, and then the other 5 go to the graveyard. So there's a good chance you're going to hit, a reanimation spell and 1 or 2 targets at the very least to go to your hand. And then you're going to be able to dump them off. Yes, you're going to lose the life, but if you play a deck where you can recover your life pretty easily, and black's decent at doing this anyways, that's not a huge concern. Plus, we're also in a format with 40 life, so that's really not that bad. And then you get to set yourself up to just go ahead and reanimate something out of the graveyard. So I really like this card, and I think it's going to see play. I'm going to definitely try it out in some Reanimator strats. And speaking of Reanimator strategies, we also have Consumed by Greed. For 1 black instant, gift a card. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power from among creatures they control. If the gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And so for 3 mana, you get an instant speed, not even sorcery speed, an instant speed way to blow up the biggest, baddest thing that your opponent's doing at that time. And if you want to go ahead and let them have a card, you get back something that got destroyed by them. Maybe you had to chump block earlier and you need something back. Maybe they blew it up with a destruction spell. Whatever the case may be, you can immediately get that thing back and take out their best threat just all in one thing. It's actually a really good card. Then we have the new Wrath effect in the set, Starfall Invocation. For 3 white, sorcery, gift a card, destroy all creatures. If the gift was promised, return a creature card put in your graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. So it's kind of like a pseudo version of Indestructible built into it if you give them a card, but you just go ahead and bounce back whatever you want to bring back. So most likely here, you keep your commander, bring it back to the battlefield by giving them a card in commander, and just be like, boom, okay, board's clean, but I keep my guy. They're white decks, I think, really should be running this card. I think it's going to be quite popular. And then another white card that's going to be quite popular, I do believe, is Season of the Burrow. It's the white season. For 3 and 2 white, you get to choose up to 5 paws worth of modes. You can choose the same mode more than once. For 1 paw, you get to create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. For 2, you get to exile a non-land permanent, and then its controller draws a card. And for 3 paws, you get to return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. So if you play this in a deck with, like, say your commander happens to be, a 3 or less, or maybe some other creature that's really good that you need to keep it hanging around, you can use that to go ahead and give it indestructible, as well as, make a couple tokens or exile a non-land permanent that's driving you nuts. Or maybe you just want to have, because we're going to be playing like a token deck, if you want to use the token mode on this, you exile a token and you can draw a card. There's a lot of real good flexibility with this card, but it's a good like army and a can type thing. And you can just do 5 rabbit tokens for 5 mana, and that's still really freaking good. And if you're in a deck built around to abuse those tokens, you can get 10 of them for the mana with a token doubler or whatever. I mean, this has a lot of promise. I like this card. Then we have a card that's a small ball reanimation spell in Dewdrop Cure. For 2 and a white. It's a sorcery with gift a card. Return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And if the gift was promised, instead return up to 3 target creatures, each with a mana value of 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this has the ability for like small decks to get their stuff back in a big burst. And maybe you only have a couple of things that you're going to mess with. I can see using this in kind of like an aristocrat shell where you've lost maybe like your blood artists and your Zulaport cutthroats and those kind of things that are, draining your opponents down. And you can use a Dewdrop Cure to get a couple of those back. And if you have 3 things you can target, of course, you can just give them a card and get a 3rd one on the battlefield, and you're in business all over again. Or maybe you've had to wipe the board yourself to keep things under control, and this is a way to recover from that board wipe. This is actually a pretty good card, and I want to try to mess around with it and see what kind of strategies this will be good with in Commander and Historic Brawl. Then the next card is a white variation on Heroic Intervention. It's Dawn's Truce. For 1 and a white, it's an instant of gift a card. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. If the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible. So it's not as good as Heroic Intervention since you don't have to give them a card, but it is a nice way to get that kind of thing in like a mono white deck or a non-green deck to give you access to a similar effect. And I do like having things that give mass amounts of hexproof or indestructible in my decks to protect my stuff, especially if I'm using some kind of special creature type that matters deck or vampires, that kind of stuff. This would be great in a Clavileño deck or anything like that. So yeah, this card's going to see play, and I definitely want to get a copy. Now, if there's a mouse deck coming to standard, this card will see play in it. And if there's a mouse deck in Commander or Historic Brawl, this will also be in there too. Manifold Mouse. For 1 and a red, it's a 1/2 mouse soldier with Offspring 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target mouse you control gains your choice of Double Strike or Trample until end of turn. So this has the ability to take, some of the other mice that we've already seen and make them much more dangerous. You also have the ability to use, the creature type shifting of things like a Maskwood Nexus to make all your stuff into mice. And then this thing can give basically anything Double Strike at that point. So there's a lot of different ways you could use this card, whether it's in a Creature Type Matters deck or in just a generic red X aggro deck. Now for our next card, I have to go to a translation because I could not find an English translation on the card itself. This is Heartfire Challenger. For 1 and a red, it's a mouse warrior with haste and prowess, and it has the Valiant ability, and it says whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until end of turn. So this actually has a lot of stuff going for it, which is really good, and this actually works really well with the last card we looked at, the Manifold Mouse, that gives, the double strike or trample because it has prowess. So you're able to, cast a spell to pump it up with the Valiant ability to exile off to the side, which again gives the prowess trigger, which then can be given trample or double strike, depending on what you need to punch it through. And then you can also cast the spell and say it's another type of like pump of some sort that you can use to target another Valiant mouse or something of that nature. So if there's a mouse deck in standard, this is another card that will probably see play in that deck. And the same thing goes for Commander and Historic Brawl. Then we have the bat leader from the set that was in the story, Zoraline Cosmos Caller. For 1, a white and a black. It's a 3/3 bat cleric with flying and vigilance. And it says whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain a life. And whenever Zoraline enters or attacks, you may pay a black and a white and pay 2 life. And when you do, you return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Now, finality counters kind of suck. They kind of make the ability not that great. It's already limited to the whole 3 mana value or less. So the finality counter seems like just another thing to kind of keep it because maybe it was really busted and they had to add that to it. But we do have ways in Commander in particular to avoid those finality counters. Something like Feign the Broker can remove any kind of counter to make a treasure, or you can use something like Power Conduit, which removes the counter, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that you control. So you have ways of actually just getting rid of that counter and just keep recycling these creatures over and over again if you want to play like an aristocrat shell with her, or some kind of, alternate version of life gain where you have a bunch of bats. Unfortunately, I did look at our stuff, and unless there's a bunch of good bats coming in this set, there's actually not a ton of good bats in Magic the Gathering other than the Deep Cavern bat. Now, this guy I haven't read yet. I just saw him and I downloaded him while I was at work. This is Vren the Relentless. For 2, a blue and a black. He's a 3/4 rat rogue with ward 2. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. That's a pretty strong ability. And at the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature gets +1/+1 for each other rat you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. Holy crap and a cracker. Okay. So if you don't like mono black rats, we now have a commander that is blue black, so you gain access to blue and do dumb busted stuff, including things that, double up triggers and things like that. Wow, this is this is kind of goofy. So yeah, this is a really good card, and yeah, I'm definitely gonna try to build a rat deck that's not mono black because I kind of hate the mono black ones, but this one might pick my interest. We have another card I haven't had a chance to actually read, but he's a story character from the art in this thing I saw, so I downloaded it too. The infamous Cruel Claw. For 1, a black and a red. It's a 3/3 weasel mercenary with menace. It says whenever the infamous Cruel Claw deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You can cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. Okay, that's pretty strong. They have been really pushing Rakdos colors into stealing your opponent's crap, or doing weird, I don't know what you want to call it, you pay and you get to exile stuff from the top of your deck and then play it with an alternate cost, like pay life and stuff like that. They've been doing a lot of weird stuff with Rakdos lately. I mean, I kind of like it, but dang. My only quibble here is in the story and in the art here is Cruel Claw uses poison on his sword and they did not give him Death Touch. That's my only quibble with this card. We have a card that gets really freaking big in a tokens deck, Burrowguard Mentor. For a green and a white. It's a rabbit soldier with trample. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. So we already have a rabbit that's similar to this, where it's each permanent you control, but it doesn't have trample. Whereas this one is, we get all of our creatures and then it has trample already built into it. So there's going to be a rabbit deck, and both of those rabbits are going to be in the deck. They're going to be big, and you're going to have ways to give the other one trample, and you're going to give this thing other abilities like lifelink or flying or whatever. and somebody's going to get hit really hard in the face with a bunny. And the last card I have for you tonight is Mist Breath Elder. For a green, you get a 2/2 Frog Warrior that says at the beginning of your upkeep, return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Mist Breath Elder. Otherwise, you may return Mist Breath Elder to its owner's hand. Now, the thing that I'm thinking of that you could really do with this is things that have enters the battlefield triggers attached to them. So something that deals damage when it enters, or like a Solemn Simulacrum where you get to go fetch a land. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can bounce it back to your hand to recast it to get that ETB again. Then you get another +1/+1 counter on this, and it grows. In, I think it's Pioneer or Historic, I could see playing this alongside the Burning Tree Emissary. So you go turn 1 this, turn 2 Emissary, and then into some other creature off the Emissary's mana ability, and then you could bounce the Mist Breath, or next turn bounce the Emissary and do it again, and basically just keep doing that over and over again. So there's a lot of things you could really do with this. The only thing, it's got a weird curving thing to it. Like if you slam this on turn 1, it's going to be a couple of turns before you can get anything else out of it. But no, it is a 2/2 for 1 mana, which these things used to not exist. They usually, or if they did, they had a drawback attached to them because they were so aggressive. And now we get these 2/2s for 1 mana, and they have huge upsides attached to them. This thing is really, really good. The other thing that you got to note here is that if you have another creature to bounce back to your hand, it is not optional. It does not say you may return another creature. It is return another. So if you had something that you don't want being bounced back to your hand, you're gonna have to work around this a little bit, or cast 2 things down that you can bounce. So this is a kind of card that you're gonna have to build around it within your deck and have that in mind. So that's it for this big batch of cards. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, if you like this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I am 1 subscriber away from 1,000 as of about 10 minutes ago when I checked my stuff. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.